let's jump into my Passover materials. So I particularly like, so we'll start, give me a half a second. We're going to start right here. So the order of the Seder, right? This is very basic. A lot of people sing this song. I'm not going to sing it for you, but the order of the Seder, Kadesh, Orchatz, Karpas, Yachatz, Magid, Rachza, Motzi, Matzah, Maror, Korech, Shulchan, Orech, Safon, Barech, Hallel, Nirtza. Okay, so it's the Kaddish, the hand washing that we don't say the bracha over. We eat the karpas, we break the middle matzah for yachatz. Magid, we tell the story. Rachza, we hand wash in preparation for a meal. So then we say the bracha. Motzi, we say the motzi over the matzah. Then we eat the matzah. Maror is the bitter herb. Korech, the sandwich of the matzah and the bitter herb. Shulchan orech, it's the meal. Safon is the finding the afikomen. Barech, the Birkat Hamazon. Hallel, which is a special section where we sing praise to God. And Nirtza, that we end. Okay, so some of these are quick and simple. I want to start with Magid. And the reason I want to start with Magid is I found this wonderful article on the Jewish Theological Seminary website. And I would make this article bigger for you, but it's just not cooperating. Let me see. Oh, there it goes. All right. Is that better? Matzah's majestic meaning. Can you guys see this okay? Okay, good. Okay. So this woman, Judith Hopman, is a professor, or was, I'm not sure if she's still teaching currently or not, of Talmud and rabbinic culture. And this is a couple years old, but nevertheless, it's really, I thought, lovely. So I'll read to you, unless someone wants to read, and then I will be happy to have one of you read. But what's in the chat? Oh, Susan, welcome. It's quite all right. We're just getting started.
Okay.
On our Passover deep dive. So here we are in an article from the Jewish Theological Seminary from 2020. And this article's Matzah's majestic meaning. She starts out, I don't know why we ask the first of the 4 Seder questions. On all other night, we eat both matzah and chametz, and matzah. I'm sorry, we eat both chametz and matzah. See, my head, I do it how I'm always used to. I say matzah first. Anyway, we eat both chametz and matzah, but on this night, only matzah. The halach ma'anya paragraph, which is a paragraph that comes before this in many Haggadot, that immediately precedes the question, already answers it. The opening words, this is the bread of affliction, lach ma'anya, which it means bread of affliction in Aramaic, that our ancestors ate in the land of Egypt, suggests that the Israelite slaves in Egypt, who presumably had no time to bake bread, ate matzah. And that is why we eat matzah on Passover. So why ask the first question? This interpretation of the first line of the halach ma'anya paragraph is problematic, however. Nowhere in the book of Exodus or anywhere else in the Torah does it say that the slaves ate matzah. There is, in fact, no basis for such a statement. True, Deuteronomy chapter 16, verse 3 says, when you make your paschal sacrifice, do not eat chametz with it. 7 days eat matzah, lechem oni, because you left Israel in haste, so that you remember the day you left Egypt all the days of your life. And lechem oni is Hebrew for bread of distress, which the Aramaic meaning lach ma'anya, okay? So it's the reference back to the same bread, okay? So when you make your paschal sacrifice, don't eat the chametz, 7 days only eat the lechem oni, the matzah, because you left in haste. Okay, admittedly, lechem oni is an obscure phrase. The prominent Bible scholar Adele Berlin explained to me that the word distress refers to the bread, not to the people who ate it. That is, this verse does not say that the slaves in Egypt ate matzah, but just the opposite, that the Israelites ate matzah as they were becoming free people, right before and right after they left Egypt. Bread of distress may mean the bread itself was distressed in the sense that the dough did not rise, that it remained flat. Matzah first appears in the Torah in connection with Lot and his unexpected guests. In addition to making them a meal, he baked matzah, which could be prepared fast. This is from Genesis chapter 19, verse 3. Matzah's first appearance in connection with Passover is Exodus chapter 12, which describes the sequence of events on the night of leaving Egypt. The Israelites are told to slaughter a lamb, smear its blood on the doorposts, and then eat the lamb's roasted flesh together with matzah and mirorim, bitter herbs. Celebrants should be ready to depart when eating this nighttime meal. Loins girded, feet in sandals, and staff in hand. The chapter later says that the exodus from Egypt should be observed in perpetuity by eating matzah for 7 days, beginning with the anniversary of the Exodus, which for us is the 15th of Nisan. This verse makes it clear that matzah symbolizes God's redemption of the Israelites from slavery in Egypt. But that is not all. Excuse me, too far. Sorry. The chapter goes on to say in verse 39 that when the Israelites left, they took with them dough that had not yet risen. Since they had not anticipated the need to depart so very fast, they had not prepared provisions for the journey. The raw dough was baked into matzah, probably by the sun, since they carried their kneading troughs on their shoulders. This detail about the dough is intended as praise of God for the rapid way in which he got all of the Israelites out of Egypt safely. At midnight, as soon as God's 10th plague hit the Egyptians, they pressed the Israelites to leave, and the Israelites left in haste. These verses, therefore, give rise to a second symbolic meaning of matzah. It stands not just for redemption, but for the rapidity of the redemption. Centuries later, the rabbis of the Mishnah also grasped matzah as bread of redemption, not of slavery. Rabbi Gamliel says that to discharge one's obligations at the Seder, a person has to say 3 things: Pesach, the sacrifice, matzah, and maror. He goes on to explain, why do we eat matzah? Because our ancestors were redeemed from Egypt. That is, Rabbi Gamliel sees matzah in positive terms only. When the Haggadah later incorporated his statement about matzah into the Seder ritual, the language changed somewhat. As his teaching appears in the Haggadah, Rabbi Gamliel says that the matzah reminds us that before the dough had time to rise, God revealed himself to them and redeemed them. This is a conflation of the 2 nuances of matzah, bread of redemption and bread of rapid redemption. This paragraph, and not the halach ma'anya, is the answer to the first of the 4 questions. As for the opening statement of halach ma'anya, I think the standard English translations are misleading. A better way to render the line is, this is the bread of distress that our ancestors ate in the land of Egypt on the night that they left. The italicized words do not appear in the Haggadah, but adding them is a fair interpretation. The reason I find it important to offer this correction to the meaning of the matzah is that viewing it as bread of redemption is not only closer to the plain sense of the words of the Torah, but communicates a far loftier lesson. Matzah, by its flatness, not its crispness, which is a relatively recent phenomenon, reminds us of a peak moment in our past, God's intervention in Jewish history, the end of our enslavement, and the beginnings of our peoplehood. When we mention the Exodus frequently, I'm sorry, my mouse is like, when we mention the Exodus frequently in our prayers, for example, with the phrase Zecher Litziat Mitzrayim in the Kiddush on Friday night and festivals, we are not just thanking God for past beneficence. We are also implying that as a holy people, we will not tolerate slavery anywhere in the world today. We celebrate our own freedom by rededicating ourselves to free others who are still enslaved. This is the great moral lesson of Passover, and it is triggered by looking at the flatbread on the Seder table and letting it jog our memory. At your Seder this year, you can do the following. Read the Halach Ma'anya paragraph aloud, along with its English translation, and then flip to a page much later in the Haggadah to the statement of Rabban Gamliel about the meaning of matzah, and read it aloud also. Ask the Seder guests to compare the two paragraphs. Hopefully they will notice the discrepancy between the two and begin to think about the message of matzah and the grand ethical teachings of Passover. So I love this, which is why I needed to share it with you. So these are pages from the Haggadah I wrote and that my family uses. So I wrote this Haggadah prior to reading what I just read to you.
Could you make it a little larger, Rachel?
I can make it a little larger.
Please, thanks.
Give me half a second. I'm sorry. Whoa, too large. It's that fine line between large and really large. Okay. So, so this is where I begin. Magid always starts with the 4 questions. So the Magid section of the Haggadah, which tells the story of Passover, begins with the 4 questions. In the original Haggadah text, one of the 4 questions referred to the Passover sacrifice. Since the destruction of the temple in Jerusalem, we do not offer sacrifices, so a question about reclining while eating was substituted. It is traditional for the youngest child to say this, right? So, we have Manishtana Halayla Hazemi Kol Halilot. So as you can see here, I did the Hebrew without vowels when I typed it last year, partly because it was much faster for me to type it without vowels, and because those at my Seder table usually don't need vowels to read this. But I did put in the transliteration for those coming to I often have people who can't read Hebrew at my Seder. So, at any rate, let's skip a bit. But so I have the answer, right? The answer that is traditional. This night is different from all other nights to remind us that the Jewish people were once slaves in Egypt. God, with great strength, helped us go free. Shebachol halilot anu ochlin chametz umatzah halayla hazeh kulo matzah. On this night we eat only matzah to remind us that when our people were escaping to freedom, they did not have time for the bread to rise. So that's the answer that I'm used to. Shebachol halilot anu ochlin she'ar yirakot halayla hazeh maror. On all other nights, we eat bitter herbs to remind us the Egyptians made the lives of our ancestors bitter when they were slaves. Each year, as we sit together at the Seder table, we imagine that each of us went out of Egypt. The Torah teaches us, you shall explain to your child on that day, it is because of what God did for me when I myself went out of Egypt. Shebachol halelot anu ochlin. I read this wrong. Shebachol halelot ein anu matbilin afilu pa'am achat halayla hazeh shtei pa'amim. So we don't dip at all, right? Other times on this night, we dip greens in salt water to remind us of the tears our people cried. We dip the bitter herb in the charoset to remind us of the mortar the Jewish slaves used in our forced labor in Egypt. When we combine something bitter with something sweet, we remember that even when people are sad, there is always hope for a happier time. So this apparently was the replacement for about the sacrifice. So, and this has to do with the reclining. Long ago, free people could lean on a pillow during meals to relax and be comfortable while slaves served them food. On this night, we recline to remind ourselves that once we were slaves, but now we are free people, allowed to act as we desire. Tonight is a celebration of our liberties. Okay. This is going to lead us into the next thing I want us to talk about. So, I mean, we could do the 4 children. I have a slightly new version of talking about the 4 children. You know, the Passover Haggadah that I grew up with, which at times it was the Maxwell House Haggadah. You know, they talk about 4 children: the wise son, the wicked son, the young one, and the one who doesn't know enough to. I can't recall exactly, but
the one who cannot ask or doesn't know enough or something.
So that language, the wise, the wicked, you know, the disinterested, or one who doesn't even care enough to ask, is rather dated. So I did an update on that language. When we explain, so this is the section on the 4 children. When we explain something, we want everyone to understand. This is especially true of the Pesach story. The Torah commands us 4 times that we must teach children about the Exodus from Egypt. These 4 commands suggest that there are 4 kinds of children, each of whom learns in a different way. Thus, the Torah speaks about 4 children: one who is wise, one who is contrary, one who is simple, and one who does not even know how to ask a question. Yet we know that no child is all wise, all wicked, all simple, or incapable of asking anything. At different points in our lives, we have been all of these children. So I really wanted to be far more inclusive in my, explaining this. So we'll quickly go through this. I'm trying to get to the story of Passover, but since we're here, let's just quickly cover it, okay? The wise child asks, what is the meaning of the laws which God has commanded to us? I want to know the meaning of all these rules. The child is proud to be a Jew and is interested in sharing experiences that are important to Jews. The contrary child asks, what is the meaning of this service to you? Why do you bother with all these rules? To say you is to exclude oneself from the group and thus deny a basic principle. This child acts like a stranger when attending a Seder. Such children must be told the Passover story is for them as much as for everyone else. The simple child asks, what is this all about? This child needs to understand basic facts. This child should be told that we do all of these things because God freed us from slavery in Egypt. As for the child who does not even know how to ask a question, you must start at the beginning. As it is written in the Torah, you shall tell your children on that day, this is done because of that which the Eternal did for me when I came forth out of Egypt. This child needs to learn about Judaism. Okay, so now I want us to get to the Seder, the Magid, the story, okay? And we're going to change screens. Give me a second. Here we go. Got to make it big for you. Hold on. Okay. So Exodus tells us in chapter 2, in the first 10 verses, a certain man of the house of Levi went and married a Levite woman. The woman conceived and bore a son. And when she saw how beautiful he was, she hid him for 3 months. When she could hide him no longer, she got a wicker basket for him and caulked it with bitumen and pitch. She put the child into it and placed it among the reeds by the bank of the Nile. And his sister stood at a distance to know what would be done to him. The daughter of Pharaoh came down to bathe in the Nile, while her maidens walked along the Nile. She spied the basket among the reeds and sent her slave girl to fetch it. When she opened it, she saw that it was a child, a boy crying. She took pity on it and said, "This must be a Hebrew child." Then his sister said to Pharaoh's daughter, "Shall I go and get you a Hebrew nurse to suckle the child for you?" And Pharaoh's daughter answered, "Yes." So the girl went and called the child's mother. And Pharaoh's daughter said to her, "Take this child and nurse it for me, and I will pay your wages." So the woman took the child and nursed it. When the child grew up, she brought him to Pharaoh's daughter, who made him her son. She named him Moses, explaining, "I drew him out of the water." So I want you guys to participate with me here. You can unmute. This is truly someone's English translation of chapter 2 of Exodus, the first 10 verses. And this tells us the story of Moses's beginning, right? The only person named in this entire 10 lines is Moses. Yet we can deduce the other important actors here who are not named, right? Because we know who they are by branching out from Moses, right? This identifies Moses, the most important character here, right? All the others might be background characters, but we can figure out who they are. Moses's father, a man from the house of Levi. This is Amram. He married a Levite woman. This is Yocheved, Moses's mother. Okay, they had a son. So she hid him for 3 months. When she could hide him no longer, she got a wicker basket. She wanted him to be safe, so she made it waterproof and she put it in the Nile. So where are they? What's going on at this time? Somebody help me out here.
They're slaves. They
They're
can't be.
slaves. Exactly. They're
They
slaves.
can't be having babies and doing their thing in normal life in open space.
Right. So we're not sure if Pharaoh had, my assumption is the Pharaoh had already given the edict that firstborn son or sons were going to be of Jews were going to be killed. Right. And
I do believe that's what I learned in religious school.
yeah. So
that was after that.
So she's hiding him because she doesn't want him killed, right? And I've never quite understood that, she hid him for 3 months, she could hide him no longer. I don't know, maybe he was so tiny she was wearing him and it may, strapped under her clothing. I don't know how you hide him for 3 months that you're thinking no one's going to notice. Was he was the quietest little baby there ever was, and he was a very tiny baby. I just don't know. That's okay, fine. It's not that important. So she puts him in the Nile. We know who his sister is, right? Miriam. Okay. So, and we have further proof that there are slaves in Egypt because now we got the daughter of Pharaoh, right? Who's going down to the Nile to bathe. She spies him because he now is old. He's loud enough when he's crying that she hears him, and she takes pity on him. Now, presumably, she knows the edict that her father, the Pharaoh, has decreed, and she's bravely defying it, which takes us to the title of this particular author's whole thing here, which is "By the merit of righteous women were our ancestors redeemed from Egypt." So it's the women here who are the important actors in this story, even though the only person named is Moses. So the daughter of Pharaoh is a very important actor here. Miriam, Moses' sister Miriam, right, speaks up, says to the Pharaoh's daughter, Shall I go and get you a Hebrew nurse to suckle the child? She's ingenious here. She knows her mother could be involved. Pharaoh's daughter says yes. So she goes and she brings Yocheved, and it ends up that Pharaoh's daughter surreptitiously pays them to take care of the child until the child is returned to her, and she adopts him and she names him Moses because she drew him out of the water, right? All right, so this is direct from Exodus. So up here, she talks about a midrashic view of the Exodus. So midrash is a form of study that, rabbis used. They would, like the Babylonian Talmud, we've heard about various Talmuds were written where they studied the Torah and thought about what was happening in that time and tried to connect stories to further expiate, to give us a better understanding and possible clarity of what we're reading in the Torah. So this is from the Babylonian Talmud. And Miriam the prophetess, the sister of Aaron, took a timbrel in her hand. This is the quote she starts with. and she says, was she the sister only of Aaron and not the sister of Moses? Well, we happen to know that Aaron is the older brother of Moses. Miriam is the older sister of Moses. So maybe when it was written, Moses wasn't born yet. If they're only mentioning Aaron. But anyway, so this Rav says, according to it teaches that Miriam prophesied that when she was still only Aaron, so this was before Moses's birth, when she was only the younger sister of Aaron, she said, my mother will give birth to a son who will be the savior of Israel. When Moses was born, the entire house was filled with light. Her father arose and kissed her on her head, saying, my daughter, your prophecy has been fulfilled. But when they cast him into the river, her father arose and hit her on the head, saying, my daughter, where is your prophecy? And this is so, and his sister stood at a distance to know what would be done to him, to know what would be the fate of her prophecy. So the reason this is suggested as a midrash to study along with the actual Torah text is perhaps this explains why Miriam followed the basket once it was put in the Nile. She had prophesied that this child was going to be very important to the future. And so she needed to know what was going to become of him. And so unfortunately, her baby brother is now left adrift. She's spying on it. And in her mind, maybe she takes this brave step. I'll speak to this Pharaoh's daughter because I still believe the prophecy I have made, which is this boy, this brother of mine is going to be the savior of a people, Israel. So let's go on. So this is kind of going backwards. A certain man of the house of Levi went and married a Levite woman. So this is the first line of chapter 2 of Exodus that I showed you above. So, and these other rabbis are commenting on this. So he went according to the advice of his daughter. They're referring to Amram. Miriam and Moses's father was the greatest man of his generation. Once he saw that the wicked Pharaoh had decreed, every son that is born you shall cast into the river. He said, we are laboring for nothing. He arose and divorced his wife. All the Israelites thereupon arose and divorced their wives. His daughter said to him, Father, so this is Miriam, Father, your decree is more harsh than Pharaoh's. Pharaoh decreed only with regard to the males, whereas you decreed against the males and females. Pharaoh decreed only concerning this world, whereas you decreed in this world and in the world to come. In the case of the wicked Pharaoh, there is a doubt whether his decree will be fulfilled or not. You are a righteous person. It is certain that your decree will be fulfilled. As it is said, you shall also decree a thing, and it shall be established unto you. He arose and took his wife back, that is, remarried her, and they all arose and took their wives back. So again, the point of this is showing how Miriam had a belief and a sense that her father didn't have. Again, back to her prophecy. She was the one responsible for the future of the Jewish people by convincing her father not to be so black and white about the whole thing. Obviously, if all the men had done what Amram was doing here, they weren't even going to bear any children. There weren't going to be any future leaders because they would not bear future beings, right? But eventually he listens to her and he remarries his wife, and ultimately we get Moses and a continuation of, right, the people Israel, or what will become the people Israel. So now she has a midrash with regard to the other very important woman in the Exodus first 10 verses. This is about the princess. And the daughter of Pharaoh came down to bathe at the river. So these rabbis are talking about it. It teaches that she went down there to cleanse herself of her father's idols. In other words, immersing herself as part of the conversion process. And thus it says, when the Lord shall have washed, rachatz, away the filth of the daughters of Zion. And her maidens walked along, holechot, by the riverside. Again, the rabbis say the word for walk means nothing else than death. And thus it says, behold, I am going, holech, to die. And she saw the ark among the reeds. When the maidens saw that she wished to rescue Moses, they said to her, our mistress, it is the custom of the world that when a human king makes a decree, everybody else does not obey it. At least his children and the members of his household obey it. But you are violating your father's decree. Gabriel came down and beat them to the ground, and they died. Well, and sent Amata to take it. So one said that the word Amata means her arm, and the other said the word meant her handmaiden. But according to one who said that it means her handmaiden, didn't you say Gabriel came and beat them to the ground? The rabbi answers, he left her one handmaid because it is not proper for a king's daughter to be unattended. And according to the one who said that it means her hand, let the Torah write explicitly her hand, yachad. It teaches us that her arm was extended, which again, these are references in our Passover story, right? With an outstretched arm, Zeroa, Natuya, things like that. I know I'm going through this fast because we're just going to run out of time, but I wanted to expose you to these midrashim, which, you know, these are all from the Babylonian Talmud. There are so many various midrashim about Pesach, but I wanted us to start here because I wanted us to get to Shifra and Puah, the Jewish midwives. All right. And we all know that the Social Action Project, coincidentally, is the Shifra and Puah Maternity Center. But so this is back to the Torah, chapter 1 of Exodus. The king of Egypt spoke to the Hebrew midwives, one of whom was named Shifra and the other Puah, saying, when you deliver the Hebrew women, look at the birth stool. If it is a boy, kill him. If it is a girl, let her live. The midwives, fearing God, did not do as the king of Egypt had told them. They let the boys live. So the king of Egypt summoned the midwives and said to them, why have you done this thing, letting the boys live? The midwives said to Pharaoh, because the Hebrew women are not like the Egyptian women. They are vigorous. Before the midwife can come to them, they have given birth. And God dealt well with the midwives, and the people multiplied and increased greatly. And God established households for the midwives because they feared God. So let's see what the rabbis say in the Talmud about these midwives. So these two different rabbis, Samuel and Rav, disagree. One said they were mother and daughter, and the other said they were daughter-in-law and mother-in-law. According to him, who declared that they were mother and daughter, they were Yochebed and Miriam. And according to him, who declared they were daughter-in-law and mother-in-law, they were Yochebed and Elisheba. I have heard, the references to these Hebrew midwives, the question being, were they themselves Hebrews, or were they just the midwives assigned to the Hebrews? Right? What is the reference here? But so there is a teaching according to the one who says they were mother and daughter. Shifra is Yochebed. And why was her name called Shifra? Because she straightened, mishaperet, the limbs of the newborn. Another explanation of Shifra is the Israelites were fruitful, shifparu, and multiplied in her days. Pua is Miriam. And why is she called Pua? Because she cried out, Po'ah, to the child and brought it forth. Po is here, Po'ah. Alternatively, she was called Pua because she would speak Po'ah through divine inspiration and say, in the future, my mother will give birth to a son who will save the Jewish people. So very interesting, in my opinion. If we go back to my Passover story, so here, in my rendition of Magid, the story of Passover, the book of Exodus begins in Egypt, where the Israelites have been living. After Joseph, his brothers, and the Pharaoh he once served have all died. Feeling threatened by the Israelites, who have increased greatly in number, the new Pharaoh embarks on a campaign to subdue them, forcing them into slavery. Pharaoh said to his people, look, the Israelite people are much too numerous for us. Let us deal shrewdly with them so they may not increase. So they set taskmasters over them to oppress them with forced labor. Ruthlessly, they made life bitter for them with harsh labor in mortar and brick and with all sorts of tasks in the field. Pharaoh commands the Hebrew midwives, Shifra and Pua, to kill all newborn Israelite males after they are delivered. The midwives, fearing God, let the boys live. Pharaoh summons the midwives and demands they explain their disobedience. They reply with an ingenious lie. Pharaoh said to them, why have you done this thing, letting the boys live? The midwives said to Pharaoh, because the Hebrew women are not like the Egyptian women. They are vigorous. Before the midwife can come to them, they have given birth. God deals well with the midwives. The people multiply and increase greatly. Pharaoh, who does not fear the Israelite God, charges his people to throw every Hebrew newborn boy into the Nile, but to let every girl live. Now we get to chapter 2, first 10 verses. A baby boy who will turn out to be Moses is born to an Israelite couple. When the baby's mother sees how good he is, she hides him for 3 months. When she can hide him no longer, she puts the child into a basket and places the basket among the reeds by the banks of the Nile. His sister, who is not named at this point, but who will, 13 chapters later, be called Miriam, stations herself at a distance to learn what may befall him. Spying the basket, Pharaoh's daughter recognizes that the baby inside must be a Hebrew child, and she takes pity on him. Miriam, acting as ingeniously as the midwives, comes forward and offers to find a nursemaid. When Pharaoh's daughter accepts the offer, Miriam fetches her mother, who is, of course, also the baby's mother. Pharaoh's daughter pays Moshe's mother to nurse him and later takes him in as her son. She names him Moshe, explaining, I drew him out of the water. So anyway, so this is how I integrated all of that into my Haggadah. The Haggadot that I grew up with did not contain those. Yes, questions?
What's the relationship between Moshe and water? Mayim, is Mayim water? What is, in terms of water?
Yeah, Mayim is water.
Okay, and so how does that then get translated to Moshe?
It doesn't. One has nothing to do with the other.
But they called him, so it says, or we
I drew him out of the water. So in Egyptian, Mayim is Hebrew. I don't know how to, I don't know the word for water in Egyptian. But so he wasn't named with a Hebrew name.
Oh, that's interesting. And then, not to get so specific, but did she know it was a Hebrew child because he was circumcised? I can't think of any other reason why she would be able to determine that.
That's a possibility. Marlene?
I'm guessing because he was abandoned,
Exactly. That's what I
don't
was gonna
abandon
say.
their babies. So she couldn't see, down there in the basket, but I'm guessing she heard her father talking about this decree all the time. And so she put two and two together, I'm guessing.
That's exactly what I think, that and in fact, maybe she knew that, any baby of this age should have been dead, right? So, and the fact that he was alive in the basket led her to, again, put two and two together and say he was in hiding. And the reason he was in hiding was because he was a Jewish baby that really should have been killed weeks ago.
Were they all supposed to be killed by drowning? What about the blood on the door?
So two different things. So I don't think we're told how they're to be killed, just that the midwives are supposed to kill them, whether they're supposed to say to the mothers, oh, they died in childbirth, whether they're supposed to, strangle them with umbilical cords. I mean, who the heck knows, put their hand over their mouths that they can't get their breaths, there's not that specificity. But it is interesting that he literally tells all the midwives that because the women are attended to by midwives when they give birth, that they're the most likely ones to be able to quickly just snuff out those baby boys. With regard to the blood on the doorpost, that is sacrificial blood from the lambs, the sacrificed lambs.
Okay.
And that is put on in the evening, so that because the plague is to occur at like midnight or during the darkest hours of the night. So the Israelites have to put the blood on the doorposts prior to that. And that's why they had to be, as we read in the first part that I had shared, the article from JTS, she says, they fled in the middle of the night. They strapped their rising troughs, their bread troughs, to their backs. They're walking, the dough is in the rising trough, they're walking, the sun is beating down on it and it bakes it because it's early morning, they left in the middle of the night and they're still walking. So, all these pieces kind of go together. It's not the Cecil B. DeMille version necessarily. I don't even know how he depicts it, honestly. But this is the clear picture that I'm getting from reading all these kinds of things.